Thank you for coming to this session on teacher retention hosted by the Institute of Education, University College London. We're sorry for the late start. That's as a result of the earlier session going longer. We have 50 minutes for this session now, so we will finish in time for people to go to their next session. We have a wonderful panel that we will have each panelist giving 4 to 5 minutes short presentation. I will ask a few questions, but we do want to open up and have questions from the audience. So we will try and keep our talking to a minimum. So I'll just introduce the panel. We have Nadia Lopez on the end, who's the founder and principal of Motts Hill Bridges Academy. I've been reading the book on the plane. It's a really wonderful read and inspiring, Nadia. And as a consequence of her work with that school, has been on Ellen, has met Obama, and I think you can read her biography. And as with everybody here, I asked them to tell me something that's not in their biography. And Nadia is a typical member of the sandwich generation, and that she has a 75-year-old mother and a 17-year-old daughter getting ready for college, and we know all the pressures that come with that. So it's great that you're here, Nadia.
Thank you.
Then next to her we have Jane Perrinman, who's a department head of research at the Institute of Education, University College London, and again you can read her work, her biography. Her claim to fame is that she has sung with Barry Manilow on 3 occasions at the O2 Arena in London. Next to her is Sam Sims, author of The Teacher Gap, a book that is really picking up sales and attention in the UK. It's a book that really unpicks some of the core issues from a statistical perspective, as well as a nice, lovely qualitative interviews with people. Sam's interesting fact, and he doesn't want to be known as a boring statistician, so he wants people to know that he has a Labrador called Heidi. Then next to Sam we have Jana Palajavi, thank you, who's the Director of International Relations at the Ministry of Education and Culture of Finland. She wants it known that she comes from the country that has been voted the happiest country in the world for the 2nd time, and it's not necessarily because of the education system, but because most people like Jana were born with skis on. So we have a really interesting panel for you. Look, I think one of the issues, so being at this conference, we have a real sense of how we're amongst people that incredibly value the teaching profession. We know about the excitement of being a teacher. We know about the wonderful contributions we make to young people's lives, to the broader society. And yet we have trouble in many locations attracting people into the profession. So part of this panel is we want to ask questions about why don't some people want to be teachers? Why is it that some people do stay in the teaching profession for a long time? What do we want to do to keep people in the profession? And how do we attract teachers to areas of most need? Because in many locations, the places where it is hardest to attract teachers are where we most need the best teachers possible to work with young people from highly marginalised backgrounds. So we'll begin with Nadia, who'll make a few comments about her school, and then move through the panel.
So my school is Motts Hill Bridges Academy. It's a middle school, so the grades are 6th to 8th grade. Typically, the scholars will start at the age of 11, but because we're in one of the highest needs, high impoverished, high crime areas, I can have scholars all the way until 16 years old. It is very hard to find teachers to want to work in a community where only 32% of children graduate from high school, and the average income is only $11,000. So a typical scholar who comes into my building, just alone this year for 6th grade, only 7 out of 81 children were able to read on grade level. Majority are on a 1st or 2nd grade level, but by the time they leave us in 8th grade, they have to be prepared for high school. So one of the challenges is finding educators who can appreciate adapt to the complexities of the beautiful challenges that I say is in Brownsville, and be able to see the potential in children and don't see it as it is their fault, but someone did a disservice, and it is our responsibility and calling to do what is right. So my school has become what you would say a beacon of hope. Because of my high expectations, I am there to support my teachers. I still stay in the classroom, so I don't speak from a place of just observing, but actually practicing and making sure I'm the example first before I ask anyone in my building to do the work.
Oh, that was a good one. Hi, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about a recent project I did on teacher retention within my own university. I conducted a survey of the last 5 years of our teacher trainer alumni, and we cover various routes into teacher training, employment-based routes, university-based routes, etc. We had 1,200 responses to the research, so I feel quite confident that I can talk knowledgeably about what our graduates think, although I don't deal in enormous statistical sets, which you're going to hear from Sam later. We asked them what motivated them to become teachers in the first place, and we asked them to reflect on what they had thought the rewards and challenges would be of being teachers. And then, most importantly of all, we asked, were they still in teaching? Those who had left, we asked why they had left. And those who stayed, we asked what possible reasons might cause them to leave in the future, or if they saw it as a long-term thing. Around 18% of our cohort had left. And I say within the first 5 years, but obviously we were surveying people who had only just started. And that's slightly lower than national statistics. But when we asked people how long they were likely to stay, we predicted that over a 5 to 10 year period, we would have around a 40% attrition rate, which is very much in line with other countries who exist within what I call a high stakes accountability regime. They went into teaching for all the reasons that have inspired us so much here. They wanted to make a difference, they wanted to work with children, they wanted to share their passion and their love for their subjects. They were, they said, aware of the workload. Many of them were actually worried more about behaviour management, but actually the reality of teaching, they thought there wasn't really anything to worry about there as long as they were supported. So when we asked people why they had left, workload and work-life balance came on top. And we wondered why, having been aware of the workload issues, they were still the issues that led people to leave. And the answer was in the other reasons they picked, the highest of which were the target-driven culture and constantly changing government initiatives. People talked about doing the job of teaching being about performative tasks which were about box ticking and were not for the good of the people they were teaching, and also took them away from the more creative aspects of what they'd gone into teaching for. And I think that's probably a good moment to go on to you.
Thanks. So I think the evidence points to a couple of sort of big determinants of retention. What Jane's talked about is definitely one, and the sort of culture of management by numbers, which has grown in education. But I want to talk about something else, which is pay. Almost everybody I meet in education makes the case to me that pay is not actually a big deal for teachers. You know, we know teachers are mission-driven individuals. But actually, I think the evidence is in tension with that in places, and perhaps I'm being slightly controversial on purpose here. So just a bit of context for those of you who don't know the UK and England. We've had falling teacher retention since 2010. It's declined most amongst early career teachers. Those are the ones we're struggling to keep. It's worse in STEM subjects at secondary than in arts and humanities subjects. And it's worse in the secondary phase, pupils between the ages of 11 and 16, than it is at the primary phase. And I think a good explanation of what's going on with teacher retention should be able to account in some way for these facts that we see in the data. It's important to think about teaching in long-run context as well. You know, in the middle of the 20th century, teaching was a relatively very high-paid public sector profession. So in the 1970s, for example, men with qualified teacher status in England earned more if they had a teaching job than men with the same qualifications who, for whatever reason, had decided not to go into teaching. The gap was the same for women, but actually even larger. By the sort of turn of the century, 90s, 2000s, that position had reversed completely for men. So, men with teaching qualifications would now earn more outside teaching than inside teaching on average. And we'd almost reached sort of parity between those two pay levels for women. And the World Bank have a really nice study where they show across 32 countries, or World Bank data, that as a country gets richer, this kind of gap between public sector pay, the public sector pay premium, and private sector pay tends to sort of erode. And it's quite easy to understand why, right? As a country economy grows, there are more kind of high skill, high pay employment opportunities. So in the UK, we've had a big increase in, for example, banking, life sciences, jobs like this that previously weren't available. And this has been exacerbated by a decade of austerity and pretty severe public sector pay freezes that have seen teachers' pay falling behind or rising more slowly than other pay in other sectors. It also crucially varies by subject. If you look at the kind of average pay by degree subject in England, you make the most money essentially if you do law, economics, or medicine. We don't teach any of those subjects at secondary in England, so we're not trying to attract those sort of graduates. The next highest paid is STEM. We do teach these subjects, science, engineering, maths, and that's where we have the shortage. Arts and humanities graduates paid less on average. We don't really have a shortage of arts and humanities graduates. And the size of these gaps are quite big in England. The average physicist or somebody with a physics degree gets paid £6,500 more per year on average than the person with a physics degree who teaches. If you multiply that by 40, the length of a career, it's £250,000. The Varkey Teacher Prize is worth 750,000 English pounds. We're asking physicists to forego a kind of third of the value of the Varkey Teacher Prize in order to go into a career-long job as a physics teacher. So we're asking people to make, in some sense, large sacrifices. And just finally, you can also explain with pay this difference that I pointed out between primary and secondary teacher retention rates, because around a fifth of secondary teachers in England have a STEM degree with high outside earnings potential, whereas at primary school it's more like 1 in 20. So I think I'll leave it there. And just emphasize that none of this means that I don't agree that teachers go into teaching for mission-driven reasons. I 100% believe that. My argument is just about, is pay important for keeping them in the profession once they arrive? And I would argue that the evidence supports that quite strongly.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting contributions so far. So as said, I'm Jana, I'm coming from Finland, and it seems that I'm the only one in the panel representing the government side. And that's probably why they chose Finland, because Finland is rather exceptional in that sense. There's no teacher shortage in Finland, actually, to start with. And we are making quite a big exception with among very many European countries in that sense. The status of teachers is very high in Finland. Teachers are highly respected. It's very highly valued profession. And also teacher satisfaction, according to OECD tallies, is very, very high in Finland, one of the highest in the world. So it's considered to be an attractive profession. People stay in the profession, and also we are able to kind of attract young students to choose teaching profession, although it's very difficult actually to become a teacher in Finland. We have all teacher education is given in the universities, and only approximately, on average, only 1 out of 10 of applicants to the teachers, to pedagogical faculties, get in. So we get the best 10% of the students who want to become a teacher. So probably the next question is why, how and why, and how on earth this is possible. I'm giving you kind of 4 very brief explanations. I'm not willing to take much of your time. Sorry, Sam, start with money. In Finland, the money is not an issue, actually. So the Finnish teachers are paid, they are averagely paid in the Finnish scale, if you look at the Finnish wages. If you look at the EU statistics, we are right in the middle. And if you look at OECD statistics, once again, we are right in the middle. But I think the message which is rather important when we are speaking in the global conference is that teachers should have a decent pay. They should have a pay which is sufficient to make a living. And that's not the case in every country in the world. We know that painfully well. But in a case, it's not seen as an attraction. And especially what comes to and now I'm coming to my second point, what comes to the younger generation, there are clear indications in Finland and with other professions as well, that money is not anymore the attraction for the younger generation. They want independence, they want possibilities to use their capacities in the work, they want to have freedom in their work, and there are different things which they value. It's not, money is not enough. And that is what teachers' profession in Finland is pretty much for. So there's a great autonomy. Teachers are very, very free to choose the methods in the classroom, choose the material in the classroom. Education is good. Every Finnish teacher has a master's degree. So once you have had a good academic education, research-based plus practical studies throughout your studies, and you are able to use your abilities in the work. So that's probably one catch. Third point, very briefly, is that maybe it's good to explain that with Finns we are a weird combination of being extremely rational on one side and thinking out of the box on the other side. And we have been thinking out of the box in our education system, and that's what differs us from the, let's say, other high-performing countries in the world. If you look at, compare us, for instance, to the Asian tigers, Singapore, Korea, and the others, there's a great extent of rationality in those countries in developing education system. But this kind of thinking out of the box and doing something very, very differently and doing something bizarre, that's something which we do in Finland, and that's why we get so many delegations from Asian countries actually to think why we do and why on earth we are doing it. So if I just give you some teasers, because they have their impact on teaching profession as well. So about 20 years ago, we posed a question that do we really need school inspectors? The answer was no. Not really. So we gave up. There are no school inspectors in Finland, haven't been since early 90s. Can we give the teachers liberty to use whatever material they wish to? Okay, why not if they are well educated? If we have able to kind of create, we have been able to create a good capacity, so why not? They are absolutely able to do it. Do we want to have standardized testing in school? Or does standardized testing really support learning in the classroom for individuals? The answer is no. No, actually there's no reason of doing standardized testing, so there's no standardized testing in Finland either. So very many examples in Finland, but we like to think differently. And my last point, very briefly, is that I guess one of the reasons why teaching profession is so attractive in Finland is that we really want teachers, well-educated teachers, to be engaged in the system. Not any lip service, but really engaged. So for instance, teachers are participating to the curricula, crafting the curricula at the end of the day, at the school level. We are just giving core curricula nationwide. And they are able to kind of develop their own work in the classroom. They are responsible how they want to assess and evaluate the pupils. They can do it as they wish. So a lot of liberties and a lot of really engagement and possibilities and doors open for engagements on the school level and in their own work. And as a government, we are not so great friends of having control and steering. We rather consider us to be the ones who should create trust in the society. Trust that teachers are doing their job, trust that everybody in the system is doing their job. And that's very Nordic system, a very Nordic concept, I would say, but this is something which we are for. Thank you.
Thanks, Jana. I'm very cognizant that lots of people in the audience will have questions for the panel, but I'm in kind of an enviable position in that I'm here and I can ask them each a question. So I might do that first and then open it up to the panel. Nadia, I just wondered, when you're sitting and listening to the other panel speakers, how that resonates with your thoughts in terms of employing teachers in your schools, either across different curriculum areas, differential pay, trust issues for teachers?
So I want to be honest, I'm that student in the room, so I'm taking down notes because it is a lot of information, and I want to be clear and transparent. Can I do that with you all?
Yeah.
Yeah? Teachers want to be valued. Teachers want to be respected. Teachers want to be heard. And we're not part of the conversation. Quite honestly, I did a book, Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the section that I do reference Finland. And one of the things that I recognize about the environment of teaching is, one, it does come with respect, a high level of standard of excellence that starts from the colleges and university. You get the top percentage of students to work in your school, so there's already an expectation that you're getting the best, right? The most passionate, they're going to be paid accordingly, as well as the students get personalized learning. You also have an appreciation. There's a culture that says teachers are valued. As I was listening as well, I'm hearing the idea of possibility. I come from the US. Every state governs differently. How much a teacher makes in New York is considerably different from how much a teacher makes in another state. My teachers don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs to maintain their households. I make sure that if my teachers stay a minute after school, I pay them the overtime that they deserve, because I never want anyone to sacrifice having to be in school for the betterment of their own household. But what I don't hear as a collective is, how do we tie the research with making sure government understands, and not so much Finland, but if we take the research, you're taking the voice of the teachers, but the teachers directly are not being asked by the government, but we use this research to then say, this is what's happening in the classroom. It's real simple. Ask a teacher what's wrong. Why don't I want to stay in the school? Teachers who decide to teach do it because they're passionate, and we understand it's a service. We understand it is a calling, right? The teachers who taught me made about $27,000 a year, right? That was the early 80s. My teachers aren't making that much. However, the reasons why they wouldn't want to stay, they stay with me, is because I fight. I am willing to disrupt the system. I know that there is a standardized test. It's unfair to children. I do not allow the big businesses, which are the textbook companies, to delegate what's going to happen in my building. I want my teachers to be passionate and creative. I want them to know their children. I want them to teach to the children's needs, not to the textbook, not to an exam that changes every 2 years because we have a new contract. That's not what teaching is about. But you have teachers who are being evaluated. You have teachers who feel like, I come to work just to try to make it through, so no one says that I was ineffective because I didn't follow the letter of the law. And it is unfair that when we look at the data and we talk about teacher retention, we're not just being honest and going into the schools. Policymakers never show up into our schools to understand what we're going through. Every child is different. So we want them to understand humanity. We want teachers to be empathetic. We want them to be compassionate. We want them to teach the children to be the same way, but we don't treat our teachers the same way. So when we talk about retention, we need to talk about, you're dealing with the human life first before you're dealing with the data. And that's something that we need to, address. I keep my teachers because I understand my teachers. Those who don't stay is because they're not willing to conform to the understanding that we have children whose lives we are saving. And you do not get to earn a check that is not going to allow a child to have a better life, period.
Thanks, Nadia. Jane, I know that some of this will be music to your ears from your views on accountability, but what would you say to people who say teachers and schools still need to be held to account? They still need to be accountable to the young people in the communities. What would you say to somebody that asked you that question.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, nobody is arguing that there doesn't need to be some form of accountability in education, because we owe it to those that we teach that we are doing the best for them. But we've just heard from an incredibly passionate head teacher who is dealing with how things are in her school. And if we trust school leaders, then the accountability should be to them. And if we then also, I'm loving the abolishing inspection idea, and I shall argue for that vociferously. But if we operate in a high trust, low accountability system, as opposed to what we have in England, which is a low trust, high accountability system, then that is better for attention.
Thanks, Jane. So, Sam, and I hope I don't misrepresent you. So you said controversially you were going to talk about pay, and I think everybody here agrees that teachers need to be well paid and appropriately paid. But you gave examples of how people from STEM could be earning more elsewhere. Would you suggest that people from different curriculum areas were paid differently or were rewarded differently? And if so, what might that do to a school community where you have teachers paid at different rates?
Yeah.
That was bad.
Yeah.
I'm a school governor in a primary school in Haringey, and one of the things I've learnt from the years of doing, it's a voluntary position that we have in England to help with the governance of a school. One of the things I've learnt through observing that school close up is the incredible sort of sense of esprit de corps among the staff and the sort of solidarity that they're all pushing to achieve one thing. And so I think it would be problematic, for example, to introduce, one national pay scale for science teachers and one national pay scale for history teachers. I think this is not, it doesn't fit the ethic that makes schools function really well. There are, however, things I think you can do around the edges to sort of balance up pay in terms of balance with outside earnings opportunities. And something the UK government is currently exploring for England is to pay kind of one-off, almost retention bonuses to teachers in shortage subjects. And so that would be, in effect, STEM subjects, MFL, things like that.
Modern foreign languages.
Yeah, modern foreign languages, thank you. And doing it this way stops there being this kind of obvious difference between teachers. It takes it out of the hands of head teachers, who are often very reluctant to start sort of, favouring some staff over others. And also, we know from careful studies that early career teachers are much more sensitive, their decisions to stay in the profession or not, are much more sensitive to pay than later career teachers. So by designing it in this way, where central government gives a one-off sort of bonus payment if you stay in a school to early career teachers.
In particular subject areas.
I think you can there's a nice trade-off that achieves between ensuring actually that pupils get access to appropriately qualified teachers in these subjects and not, I would hope, sort of destroying the morale of staff. And just to put one final point, the choice I think we face in England is between paying all teachers, of similar experience levels and phases the same amount of money, and having almost a sort of, if not permanent, sort of cyclical, recurring shortage of science and maths teachers. It will come back and it will come back and it will come back. And it's the disadvantaged pupils who miss out. You can see that in the data. Or paying them slightly different amounts of money, and I'm talking about maybe 5% difference between subjects, and all pupils having access to an appropriately qualified teacher.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, and I think I was telling you before we came in, I used to do a lot of work with the State Department of Education in Australia, and there was this story doing the rounds amongst staff members within the department that the Director General had banned the use of one word in the department. People were never to mention the word Finland because they were tired of keep hearing how wonderful Finland is. And I wondered, so whether there is pressure on Finland to always be a bit ahead of the game and what that means in relation to the teacher retention issue.
Yes. I'm not sure. Finland is not a very competitive nation as such, and that's something which is very, very fundamental basis also in our education system, because we don't think education system is kind of a competition, not among students nor among anybody in the system, but we are rather for stressing equity and trying to support the weaker ones. However, I guess there is a challenge which every government in the world, I guess, is facing today, and it is that what's happening around us, I mean digital development, artificial intelligence, immigration, global change, just global climate change. So how would that change teaching profession? And we are trying desperately to find answers for that. And it's very painful for me to admit that if you're asking me what will be the Finnish education system and challenges in the education system in 30 years' time, I would say that I really don't know. I honestly don't know. And how you can navigate to the unforeseen future, how you can develop a teacher qualifications and competencies in a world where you really don't know what is needed. We are speaking a lot of soft skills, and I would like to come back what Nadia said, that teaching profession or teachers are dealing with human life. Mm-hmm. And this is pretty much what is left, whether we are speaking about technological development or artificial intelligence. So teachers are dealing with human life and soft skills. And that is something which we are in Finland, actually, we are kind of taking as a basis of our strategy. So what does this really mean in the future?
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. So we have opportunity for questions from the floor for about 15 minutes. I think there might be some microphones going around. So can I just, there was a question here and then here. So if you could use the microphone so people at the back can hear. Thanks. Just here.
Thank you. My name is Mark. I'm a teacher from Vancouver, Canada. I'm a music teacher. And I want to understand something if I've misheard. I'm just wondering if you meant to assign disparate value to the work that teachers do in different curricular areas. And I'm wondering what problem that solves. Because I, as a music teacher, in the course of a 60 or an 80-minute class, I will teach students about history, geography, physics, biology, physical education. I can keep going through the list of things that I would be teaching students, in which case, perhaps as an extension of your argument, then I would deserve 8 times the pay of any other teacher in the school. And I'm certain that's not what you meant. So I'm wondering if you could just clarify how it is that certain subject areas would warrant teachers being paid more versus others being paid less.
First of all, thank you for your hard work as a music teacher. No, I really mean that. And your questions were, do I assign different value to different curricular areas? Absolutely not. I do not. And what do I think it would achieve to pay teachers different amounts? I think it would achieve giving all pupils, including disadvantaged pupils in England, access to an appropriately qualified science and maths teacher. So that's the extent of my argument. I'm not making claims about the value of different subjects or anything like that. You know, as far as I'm concerned, music is one of the best things about being alive, and I'm glad there are music teachers passing that on to the next generation.
Thanks.
Hi, Jolene. I'm a journalist and also formerly university instructor. And we've talked a lot about, or you've talked a lot about teacher pay and so on. What we haven't spoken a lot about is the school funding itself. I know Nadia in particular talked a lot about how textbooks and curriculum sort of changes at the whims of these private corporations who may up the price of a book or whatever reasons there. And also in particular the class size in Finland. It's not something I'm particularly familiar with and how that relates to funding or maybe the success of your schools.
So what I'm unclear on the question.
So it's a question not about school funding and then how that relates to class size and other things that may be impacting classrooms and teacher, whether or not teachers choose to stay, I guess.
So maybe Nada and Jana want to say something about that.
Our pay is not based off of how many bodies we have in the school doesn't impact so much the pay. It impacts how many teachers I can have in my building. So we get per capita, let's say $4,500 a child. If my enrollment is less, then I have to lose a teacher, which then means that that's going to require someone else to have to take up that work, which oftentimes, because I don't want my teachers to be burnt out and feel overwhelmed, I'll take on class loads. But in terms of how I manage my budget, primarily, I make sure that my teaching staff is in place first. I make sure that there is appropriate funding for whatever curriculum they need, as well as additional funding for after-school activities. I place the value into the teachers first before anything else gets done in the building. But to a point that I wanted to just add, when they were talking about the differences between pay, one of the things that they've tried to do in New York right now is look at the different communities. Higher need areas have a lower amount of qualified teachers. We tend to have teachers who come from alternative programs. I can speak to it because I went through an alternative program. The teachers, I feel, are not as fully prepared to walk into a building. When I got through it, I initially was not selected. I was told initially that I would not be able to handle the rigor of the program, right? But it required someone, a superintendent who had taught me, who was my assistant principal, to make a phone call and want to know specifically why that was. And so I got a phone call that said, yes, we made a mistake, right? But then I saw teachers who came into the program who didn't last through the summer because they didn't realize how much work it would require to deal with certain children. So when a teacher who has to come to my building has to understand that 32% of my children have special needs, we have a high number of children who are coming in either from foster care or temporary housing, so that means they live in shelters. They could be with us today and move somewhere else in New York City and not be with us tomorrow, as well as children who are English language learners. For some of them, it may seem like I could go to another school district and make the same amount of money and have more of a demographic where children are on grade level, and I don't have to deal with all of the issues of classroom management. So in that case, to retain teachers, it may seem like a better fit to say, we will give you additional just because it's harder to staff, as opposed to it's based off of your license area.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. If I start with class size, so average is always misleading, especially when we are speaking of my country. So on average in basic education from classes 1 to 6, where we have classroom teachers teaching practically all the subjects in the classroom, it's between 18 and 22, depending on the grade where you are. However, when we come to a subject, it can vary. It varies from 8 to 25, 30. And sometimes it happens that, I'm not quite sure whether we ask about class size or how many teachers we are having in a classroom, because we can have easily 30 kids at the classroom, but 2 teachers teaching them at the same time. I mean, guiding for the group work and so on and so forth. So yes and no. And if I may say a couple of words of school funding as well. So in Finland, we have, once again, we are rather exceptional. So all Finnish schools are public or enjoying public funding. So education is free of charge for every child in Finland. So about 2% of Finnish schools are private, but they are subsidized by the government. So normally the parents don't even know whether the school is private or public, where their child is in, because you really cannot see the difference. They are choosing the school next door or the school which is offering proper language selection or some specialization which they wish to.
Thanks, Jana. So there's a question over here, I think. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Emma Russo and I am a teacher in London. I just wondered, so on the question about, and the discussion about pay, it seems impossible to me not to discuss the pay gap, which in England at least has been highlighted by gender pay auditing. And there is an astonishing gap for a female-dominated profession between men and women, especially in the academy system, which has kind of been allowed to flourish. And I guess I wondered if you knew of any systems or examples of places that have been in a similar situation and action that has been taken, because if we're talking about teacher retention, we've got a system full of talented, capable women who are not being promoted and rewarded to be outstanding, trusted school leaders, like you've got Nadia in front of you.
Did somebody want to take up that question?
So to provide context, in the UK we now have a requirement that organisations publish their gender pay gap data in a standardised form, which has been helpful certainly in sort of having provoking a debate and informing a debate about this. Academy schools are autonomous schools, and one of the things they have more autonomy over is the way they set pay, or they did for some time. And school chains such as ARC, which is a large multi-academy trust, have been very transparent about publishing their data and sort of interrogating their own data to see where the gender pay gap comes from. I'm sure other multi-academy trusts have done the same. I think what they find in ARC, at least, which is the data I've looked at closely, is that this partly reflects a problem with progression. The pay gap reflects both a problem with progression to senior levels and a higher proportion of women in lower paid, sort of non-educational roles in schools, what's sometimes called support staff. So I think, I agree, we need to let everybody with the potential to be a great school leader become a school leader. And I think we're doing a pretty good job on that around the qualifications for headship and so on. But I suppose the only thing I would add to that is that, in part, this reflects not just a pay gap at the top, but actually a pay gap at the very bottom for so-called support staff in schools who, make a critical contribution to the life and success of schools.
I would just add to that. I just examined a PhD thesis about male teachers in primary schools, and there was a significant group of, not all of them, but a significant group of them who went into primary because they saw they could move into headship quite quickly as a way of doing that. So I think that's part of that gender pay gap as well. Yeah. Sorry, there was a... Yeah.
Hello, my name is Justyna and I'm a journalist from Poland. Actually, 2 weeks from now, we are going to have the biggest teacher strike in the history of Poland. 500,000 of teachers are going to stop their work, includes final exams. It's almost all about salaries, of course, but it's crisis we can't stop right now. Do you have any advices how to manage that after that crisis? Because, yeah, I know it's a tough one. And you don't have the money for that.
Sounds like a policy question.
Well, yes, I was pretty much
we
afraid
always
of
want to
it.
be less as Finland.
Yeah, I was very much afraid of that. So what comes to the, it's a very difficult question what to do after strike. We have had strikes in Finland as well, but we have tried to manage our situation with the teacher union so that we are integrating them and engaging them to all reforms in education. So we are giving them the floor to say what they are, to speak out their views. And of course, sometimes we don't agree, but it helps a lot if they feel kind of that they are part of the process, and if you can kind of compromise in some extent so to get them committed, at least partially committed to the processes. So that would have been rather helpful in Finland and in the case of Finland. But I know that our example is probably not the best possible one, because I would say that our relation with the teacher union is quite constructive. And that's quite, I'm not sure whether that's reason or result, but still.
Hi, this is for the lady from Finland again. What is the minimum standard of the teachers who come into the entry level? Is it a degree? Do you have a level that you can explain to us a little bit? Question number 2, where does the high trust, low accountability start from? Does it start in the universities? Is it the way you train your teachers? Is it a mindset? I mean, or do you train your head teachers? Where did it start from, and how do you continue on that? And last, if you're not big on assessment and examinations, then how do you have an entry level in universities? Or do you want to tell us that everybody in Finland can just walk in a university? I mean, you must have something to have a criteria at some point or the other. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I start from the end, so we do have entry tests to the universities, but they are up to the universities, and they are profiling actually the admission tests differently. So in teacher training, most of the universities are cooperating in Finland so that they are rather unified, but still. Part of the teacher training is of course that we see that the Finnish education system is kind of a package. We have good teachers and capacity building of teachers, and I mean not only initial training but also retraining and continuous training of teachers. But it's also very closely linked to the changes we are making in the content of studies. I mean the curricula and curriculum development and the implementation of curricula. And that's pretty much what is already created in education. So that's kind of creating trust is kind of making people believe that they can make the difference in their own work. And that kind of confidence building we are at least trying to start already in the teacher training. But I have to kind of tell also that there was a survey about a year ago that which European Union countries, that was made only in Europe, where people do trust their countrymen most. I mean, if you ask that, are you trusting the fellow in the street? And Finland was on the top of that. So there is kind of a trust within the society that people are kind of relying on the system and relying that the Finland functions. Head teachers in Finland and or principals are always having teacher background. So it's kind of a career development for the teachers that they are kind of having opportunities to become as a teacher. And as said, the only requirement for teachers to be competent in Finland to act as a teacher is that they do have a master's degree from grade 1 to 6 in pedagogics. If they are teaching subjects from grade 7 onwards, they must have master's degree in a subject or subjects they are teaching, plus 1 year, approximately 1 year, additional pedagogical studies. So I don't sure if I said. Yes, subject teachers on the top of the master's degree in the subject, let's say mathematics, they have to do, it's not exactly 1 year, but approximately 1 year pedagogical studies. You can do it parallel with your master's degree if you know already that you will act as a teacher or afterwards.
So thank you. Okay, one very quick question. And, yep.
This is related to salary, teacher retention issues. I do understand that people in Finland or in the UK or in the United States working in a teaching profession, they are teachers from the United States or from the UK or from Finland. Teachers in this part of the world, I'm talking the UAE, the GCC, or expat communities where teachers are mainly non-locals. So money-related teacher retention issues become paramount. How do you suggest to manage that, given in mind that one of the main drivers for a teacher to leave his or her home country to work abroad is the finances? I leave the floor to any of the panelists.
A 30-second response from...
So, sorry, can I just clarify? Is your question that you find that pay in this context is important, but it's a struggle, but in budget terms to address that? Or? The
reason why somebody leaves his or her home country to work abroad is financial.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
So the retention, the pay-related retention issues become paramount in this context.
Okay, yeah. So my 30-second answer is
15 now.
There's a really good study in Texas in the 2000s where they look at how sensitive teachers are to pay in different parts of their career. And basically, the earlier you are in the career, the more sensitive you are to pay in terms of making that stay-leave decision. And so a sensible thing for countries to do is just flatten the pay gradient in the early career, right? Put the pay where you get the biggest sort of retention bang for the buck. By the way, in Finland, beginning teachers are paid $11,000 more than teachers in the UK. So I think you guys have got it right.
Okay. Thanks. Look, thanks for coming to this session. I'm sure there's many more questions. I know I've got loads of questions I would like to ask the panel, but thank you so much for a really engaging and thought-provoking discussion, and thanks to the audience as well. So thank you.